Horzine Biotech has been telling the world a story for nearly a century. The story goes like this. A corporation founded with good intentions was betrayed by a rogue CEO whose personal obsession caused a catastrophe nobody else inside the company wanted or expected. When that catastrophe happened, Horzine responded by removing the CEO responsible, pivoting its resources toward managing the crisis, and positioning itself as the most effective tool humanity had for surviving what Kevin Clamely had unleashed. That is the official story, and almost none of it holds up when you actually look at what Horzine did, when they did it, who knew about it, and what they have been doing in the 70 years since the outbreak that should have ended them. This is Horzine's secret history, every lie the company has told across 3 games, what they were actually doing behind each of those lies, and what the pattern connecting all of it tells you about what Horzine is still doing right now in 2091 that nobody in the franchise has fully exposed yet. If you have never played any of the games or watched any previous video, in this series everything gets explained as we go. Let's get into it. Start with the lie everyone knows and look at it more carefully than most people have. Horzine was contracted by the British Ministry of Defense to develop the ultimate soldier, the Bedlam Initiative, a classified project to create genetically engineered soldiers that would feel no pain, no fear, and follow any order without question. The official framing of this arrangement is that Horzine was a contractor following government instructions, that the research happened because the government commissioned it, that when things went wrong, the government was as surprised as anyone. But here's what that framing skips over. The government knew what they were commissioning: a biological weapon in human form, creatures engineered to kill without hesitation. The Bedlam Initiative was not a pharmaceutical research program that accidentally produced monsters. It was a weapons program that produced exactly what weapons programs are designed to produce. And when the outbreak began, the British government's first instinct was not to warn the public. It was to send military teams with 2 objectives simultaneously: stop the Zeds and erase any evidence of government involvement in the project that created them. That second objective is the one that never gets talked about enough. The government did not respond to the outbreak by saying we commissioned this research and we are responsible for what it produced. They responded by trying to make sure nobody ever found out they commissioned it in the first place. And here's what that actually means when you zoom out far enough to see the full picture. The very first cover-up in the Killing Floor franchise's history was not Horzine's, it was the government's. And Horzine watched that happen and learned something that shaped every decision the company made for the next century. When something goes wrong, the people with power do not face accountability. They manage the story. Now look at what Horzine actually did after the outbreak. They ousted Kevin Clamely from the CEO position and rebranded themselves as the solution to the crisis they had caused. This is presented in the franchise's official history as a reasonable corporate response to an extraordinary situation. Clamely went rogue. The company removed him. The company pivoted to managing the aftermath. But think about what actually happened. Horzine did not shut down. They did not hand their facilities and research over to governments for independent oversight. They did not allow an external investigation into what had been happening in those underground London labs for years. They did not open their books or their research records to anyone outside the company. They fired the CEO, kept everything else, and started charging survivors to fight the monsters their research had produced. That sentence is worth sitting with for a moment because it is the most accurate single description of what Horzine's post-outbreak pivot actually was. Not a humanitarian response, a business model, one that positioned the company as indispensable to the very crisis they had created. And the community has long suspected something darker underneath that model, that deploying mercenaries against Zeds in controlled environments was not purely humanitarian, that it was also field data collection. Real-world performance testing of Horzine's creations against real human opponents in real combat conditions. The mercenaries fighting through London's streets were not just cleaning up Horzine's mess. They may have been Horzine's most valuable ongoing research subjects. And the mercenary program was not the only operation Horzine was running that the public knew nothing about. Now here's the detail in the confirmed lore that most people walk straight past without fully processing what it actually means. In the Wyre Forest not far from Wells, a secret Horzine facility was running a program specifically focused on biological camouflage. The Stalkers, the fast and aggressive female line of specimens, were produced there. And the research notes describe something that gets more disturbing the longer you sit with it. Female subjects in dormitories under constant UV lighting, being monitored through one-way mirrors. The franchise has never confirmed whose genetic material the Stalkers are based on, but the community's strongest theory, and it is a theory with real supporting evidence, is that the material came from Rachel Clamely, Kevin's own living daughter, used without her knowledge as the genetic basis for an entire line of bioengineered specimens while she was still alive and had no idea it was happening. If true, Kevin Clamely was not just running experiments that produced monsters. He was running experiments that used his own daughter as raw material, and Horzine as a corporation was operating that facility, staffing it, funding it, running the dormitory program that kept human subjects under constant surveillance in a forest in Wales while London continued to function normally above ground. This was not a rogue experiment Kevin ran alone in a corner of a lab somewhere. This was a Horzine operation. And operations like that one do not stop just because the outbreak eventually ended and the world started rebuilding. Jump forward to 2091 and look at what Horzine has become after 70 years of operating without meaningful external accountability. They built Clamefield, Nevada, an entire city for their own employees, named after the family whose founder caused the original outbreak. Corporate architecture deliberately cold and imposing. Parks and markets and residential towers and a Bank of Horzine, a place where their most trusted workers lived and raised families inside an environment the company controlled completely. Underneath that city, Horzine had built a hidden Z storage facility without telling anyone who lived above it. In the context of Horzine's full history across 3 games, the Clamefield facility is not an isolated incident. In London, Horzine ran dangerous experiments in underground facilities beneath a city without telling the population. The experiments escaped, and thousands of people died. In Clamefield, Horzine ran a Z storage operation in underground facilities beneath their own company city, without telling the employees who lived above it. The facility was activated, and the streets became a war zone. Same decision, same rationale, different city, 70 years apart. The company did not learn from London that storing dangerous biological material underneath civilian populations was wrong. They learned that if you control the city, you can keep it secret longer. And then there is Dr. Emmanuel Moorcroft, Horzine's chief scientist and director of the R&D Red Division, a classified research division. He founded himself operating at a level of secrecy above the rest of the company, running Meyer experiments on living subjects, producing entirely new categories of Z, eventually opening a rift to an alternate dimension from an abandoned research base in Antarctica. Someone at the top of Horzine approved that division. Someone looked at what Moorcroft was proposing and decided it was worth protecting from scrutiny. Someone gave him the resources and the institutional cover to do what he did across 4 seasons of Killing Floor 3's story. That someone has never been identified, which raises the question nobody in the franchise has asked directly yet. Did Horzine know what Moorcroft was building toward? Not the Dread Zone specifically. The direction. A chief scientist running classified experiments on living subjects in a division so restricted that most of the company does not know it exists is not something that happens without institutional support from the very top of the organization. And when Moorcroft eventually went rogue and seized an oil rig in the North Sea with his personal followers, Horzine's response was not to explain what they had known or when they had known it. Their response was to let Nightfall handle it, which is exactly what happened after the London outbreak. When something Horzine built goes wrong, someone else cleans it up, and Horzine survives to build the next thing. The most important question about Horzine in 2091 is not what they have done. It is what they are still doing that nobody has found yet. Moorcroft's R&D Red Division was the most restricted research operation in the company, but Horzine runs multiple divisions. The Red Division was specifically classified above the others, which implies the others exist and are running their own programs with their own levels of access and their own secrets. What is happening in those other divisions right now? Because every time Horzine's actual operations have been exposed across 3 games, what has been found is worse than the official story suggested. Not slightly worse, categorically worse. The government-funded weapons program was actually a personal grief project that produced an army. The humanitarian mercenary response was actually field data collection. The company that positioned itself as humanity's best defense against the Z crisis was building Z storage facilities underneath its own employees' homes. And the classified research division was building a door to an alternate dimension. Every revelation across nearly a century of Horzine's history has followed the same pattern. What they admit to is bad. What they were actually doing was worse. And what they are still hiding is worse than that. And after all of it, after 3 games and nearly a century of these revelations, Horzine is still operating, still producing Zeds, still running research divisions, still more powerful than any government on Earth has been able to meaningfully address. The secret history of Horzine is not a list of past mistakes. It is a pattern that is still running. That is Horzine's secret history, from the Bedlam Initiative to the Wyre Forest Stalker Program, to the Mercenary Model, to the Clamefield Storage Facility, to the R&D Red Division, to the Dread Zone. A corporation that has been managing its story for nearly a century rather than facing accountability for what it has actually done. And the only people paying close enough attention to notice the pattern are 6 specialists, a base in Oregon, and a director who gave away $52 billion because she grew up knowing exactly what that pattern looked like from the inside. Subscribe so you do not miss what Year 2 reveals. Because if Horzine's history is any guide, whatever is still hidden in those other research divisions is going to surface eventually. And when it does, the question is not going to be whether it is worse than what came before. It is going to be how much worse. And drop a comment. Horzine managed the story after London, managed it after Clamefield. Let Nightfall clean up Moorcroft while staying silent about who approved his division in the first place. Who do you think is actually running Horzine in 2091? Because Kevin Clamely is still unaccounted for. The person who approved Moorcroft's division is still unidentified. And a corporation this good at managing its story for this long does not do it without someone very specific at the top making very specific decisions. Tell me who you think it is.